In this video, we are going to talk about SDLC. SDLC stands for Software Development Life Cycle. We understand what are the different phases of software development life cycle. In the next 6 or so videos, I'm going to be covering this SDLC in great detail. If you were ever a part of any IT project or a software company, or even if you studied computers in your curriculum in your school or college, you would already be familiar with what SDLC is. And if you are already familiar, you can feel free to jump to the Scrum lectures, which is in the next section. You do not need to continue to watch this video. But if you need a refresher or you have no idea what SDLC is, I would insist that you go through these lectures and at least grasp the different terminologies that are there that will help you in the industry. If you're developing any big project, may it be software, hardware, or anything, right? There is always madness. There are always 100 things that you need to do. So whenever you have something like that, you have to always put a method to your madness. And how do you achieve that? Well, there is a life cycle that has been created for software journey where you go through each phase, and hence the word software development life cycle, which is the software has to go through each of these phases to attain maturity or become an adult, as we say, right? Although we are going to talk about the software in most of our terminologies, but this does not only apply to software. Having a development cycle or a phase is important for any product that you see, a car, an airplane, a table, a desk. It all goes from planning to execution. Same thing that we do in our software. So irrespective of what your domain is, you will still be able to relate to it as long as you understand and put some context to what these phases signify for any of the product. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. The software development lifecycle is a structured methodology for building good software. It consists of distinct phases that basically take you from inception or planning to maintenance phase. SDLC ensures that you build a high quality software by ensuring certain standards that are put in place for each of the phases. Let's look at the first phase, which is nothing but your planning phase. We also call this as inception. This is where you plant the seed for the tree that you want. Let's look at what happens in the planning phase. It is very obvious when you are in a planning phase, you define your objective and the scope for your project on what you intend to do. Unless you have a goal or an objective, you are lost. So therefore, it is very important to have your product go through the software planning phase. In this phase, the stakeholders collectively combine their forces, come together, collaborate, and deliver a high quality plan so that they can move to the next phase of getting some requirements around it. What are the key considerations you should have when you're doing a planning or trying to implement a project? The biggest one is obviously budget. Then comes the timeline, and then comes the resources and the feasibility for executing the project. So all of this will be discussed in our planning phase video. Once your planning is done, you move on to requirement analysis. And as the name suggests, you gather more requirements for the product that you are building. The requirement phase basically involves you gathering different types of requirements, either functional or non-functional, so that you can create that system much better. This phase also understands what your users needs, what are the system behaviors, and what is the desired output that you need to create from your activity or your development life cycle. And for any phase, there has to be a document or an output that you will generate. So for requirement phase, you create a requirement specification document that then becomes the input to your next phase. After the requirement analysis comes in the design phase. So you have the requirements, now you start sketching on how you want your system to be. In the design phase, you basically translate your requirements into an actual design or a sketch of what you anticipate to be created at the end of this cycle. The various activities included in design phase are doing wireframes and mockups, and also coming up with architecture diagrams or algorithms if you need to. This phase also defines the overall system architecture and data flow on how the system will be interacting with the users, what will the users do, what will their journey be. So we start putting some thoughts to those particular items. Once you finish your design, you actually move to development. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where everything that you have done, now you start putting and implementing it. The reason we invest so much time in the previous 3 phases, because if you have prepared yourself with a better design, your execution becomes smoother. But if you go directly into execution, then what will happen is whatever you were supposed to do in all of the previous 3 phases, you end up doing it in the development phase. And this is where most of the projects fail. And therefore, it is important to execute all of these phases whenever you go through a software. As I said, in the development phase, you start coding or creating your product or your software. This is the phase where you start converting your requirements and design into a functional component, into something that can be seen, touched, or felt. Similarly, when you have designed such a system, you've developed that system, you need to also start conducting tests on it. Your initial testing, such as unit testing, also is conducted in the development phase. So you make sure that the components you're creating are a little stable. A quick shout out to myself. I have written a book or a handbook on Scrum Master for PSM1 certification. It drives you through fitness application that you can follow along so that you can understand the different principles of Scrum and Agile. This book is available for free and the link is in the description section. Once you have completed your development, then you move on to your testing phase. Again, this testing is a little different than what you have done at a unit or initial testing level, because you just tested units. Now you're going to test at an integration level. You combine all the units because it's not always one developer developing a software. There are many people who are involved. So you combine everybody's effort and see how it works together in an integrated system. The testing phase ensures that the system functions as it was intended to be. So whatever you did in your requirements and your design, your actual product is on the same lines as you thought about it. So it is very important that you conduct the testing, and there are different types of testing you do. There's integration testing, system testing, and lastly, acceptance or user acceptance testing. This is the phase where you identify defects and issues in your system and address them or fix them so that your system becomes more stable. Now you have tested your system. What happens next? You move that into deployment. Deployment is basically your execution. You take your software, release it out to the world so that they can then start using what you have been working on. The deployment phase basically takes your software to your users, end users, in a production live environment where anybody can access it. In the deployment phase, you ensure that the software lives up to the expectations that we had planned for it to be. In the deployment phase, you may also include training and support like customer support or providing helpful articles so that your user base can get onboarded onto your system soon. Once your user base is already using your system, what happens? You need to maintain your system. You need to check for existing issues, bugs, new issues, security deployments, risks, and dependencies. All of that happens in your maintenance phase. The maintenance phase basically involves ongoing support and maintenance of your software. This is the phase where you fix existing bugs and also release new features so that you increase your functional output. And most important, you ensure that your system meets the user's expectations and needs. So let's recap. We talked about what is software development lifecycle. We saw different phases of SDLC, which was planning, requirements, design, development, testing, deployment, and lastly, maintenance. And lastly, one of my favorite quotes: great things are not done by an impulse, but a series of small steps brought together. This is what your entire SDLC is. There are a series of small things that you do, and that ultimately leads to a golden software that you're creating. If you are looking for more in-depth guidance on Scrum, Agile, or project development, please go check out my Scrum video, the link for which is in the description. There is a very beautiful course that I've created, and it will surely help you. In addition, if you're looking for different articles and have questions, I have a lot of content that I've curated on teachingagile.com. And please make sure to add your questions in the comments so I can, listen to you and take your feedback. And as we say, no YouTube video is complete unless you say the words like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.